นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ When we practice meditation regularly, and indeed any part of our practice as Buddhists following the teachings of the Buddha, we have to, from time to time, remind ourselves what we're aiming for, what is the goal, what is the purpose of our practice, how to do it, but also what are we aiming for in our practice. So the Buddha once said, well, all the teachings and the practices we do following in the footsteps of the Buddha, they all have one flavor. Just as all the water in the ocean, all the oceans of the world has one flavor. All the practice that we do has one flavor. It's the flavor of liberation, vimutti. Everything we do is for liberating the mind from the causes of suffering. So our goal is freedom from stress, freedom from suffering, the highest happiness, ultimate happiness, permanent happiness, nibbana. We're practicing for nibbana. If you become a Buddhist monk or nun, then you're ordained to realize nibbana. What does that mean? It means the end of suffering, the cessation of suffering. We say nibbana is the deathless, so that which doesn't die, that which lasts. We say the unborn, the uncreated, the unconditioned. So that which isn't born, doesn't die. So that implies something that is stable, reliable. So they also say, the goal of our practice, nibbana, is the highest state of, sometimes they use the word security or safety. That which is truly safe, meaning beyond the realm of conditions. The normal way of the world is it's a conditioned realm. Things are born, things are dying, things arise, things cease, things are subject to suffering, dukkha. They don't last, they break up. They're painful because they don't last. So our goal is ultimately to reach that which is safe and beyond pain. If we want to go beyond pain, we also go beyond pleasure, meaning the normal pleasures of life. Ajahn Chah used to say, we practice to go beyond happiness and suffering, or pleasure and pain, the normal pleasure and pain of the world. There's actually a meditation we can do where we're bringing up this recollection of the goal of the practice, the peaceful mind. They call it upasamanusati, recollection of peace, the mind of peace. So, recollection means bringing to mind. or nowadays we say being mindful of peace. And that's a perception you can bring up at any time, not just when you're sitting with your eyes closed like we've been doing just now. Say you're in the middle of a busy day or a stressful situation. If you're not immediately having to do anything, you can spend a few moments just recollecting peace. You could even bring up the word peace into your mind, or the feeling, any feeling you associate with peace, a peaceful feeling. You turn your mind to remember that feeling, or bring up that feeling at that time when you're feeling stressed or very busy, or it's a difficult time for you in one way or another. You can actually turn your mind to remember what it's like to be peaceful. You can put your mind in the mode of peace. And of course, it's not necessarily very easy to do as a one-off, but if you're practicing meditation regularly and you listen to the Dhamma and you think about the Dhamma as part of your life, maybe it's not so hard to sometimes just turn your mind to think of that which is peaceful. For Sangha, monastics, the Buddha gave the simile of the empty monastery. Monasteries tend to attract people. They're often public places where people visit to make offerings or meditate, listen to Dhamma, listen to teachings. So sometimes monasteries get quite crowded, but there'll always be a time when everyone goes home. And if you're like here as a forest monastery, you're living in the forest as a monk, there'll be times when everyone fills up the forest fills up with people for a few hours maybe when there's an event, but then they all go home and the forest becomes empty. And you can bring up the perception of the empty monastery or the empty forest because it symbolizes peace. So even at a time when you're very busy, say when the monastery is busy, as a monk, you might sit there and you remember what it's like when it's empty. Or if you're at work and you're getting stressed because you've got a pile of work in front of you, or there's lots of people, things are getting chaotic. If you have a few moments to yourself, maybe you can remember what it's like when your workplace is empty of people, or when there's very little work to do or no work to do. Or just some perception that when you turn your mind to it, makes you feel more peaceful. So an empty room, or an empty forest, or an empty sky is a very commonly used one. And the sky is often full of clouds, like just now in the monastery we had a lot of dark clouds came over and we had a heavy rainstorm. But you can remember what it's like when there's no clouds in the sky. Or if you've meditated before, when you're feeling very agitated, anxious, worried, whatever, just pause and remember what it feels like when you feel peaceful, how your body feels. Maybe the relaxed feeling that when your body becomes very light. How does your mind feel when it's peaceful? No thoughts bothering you, or if there are thoughts coming up, they're not bothering you, so they're just coming into your mind and then passing away again. So Ajahn Chah gave that simile of the person standing on the beach, watching the sea, but mindfully just watching the sea, and they see every wave comes in, but they're noticing the temporary nature of waves, and they just break on the beach and then disappear back into the ocean. Big waves, small waves, doesn't matter, they all break on the beach and go back into the ocean. He said, just like your thoughts, when you're mindfully watching your mind or you're recollecting peace, then even though you may still have thoughts coming up, they just kind of break on your mind. They dissolve again and go back into nothing. Every thought arises, passes away. Or if it's sounds, maybe you're in a place where it's a very loud and busy kind of place and the sounds are bothering you, but then if you establish mindfulness and just go to your ears and the sounds, now you're, instead of just getting caught up into the sounds and reacting to them, you just notice sounds come into your ears and then disappearing again. Even loud sounds, multiple loud sounds, loud noises. Say if you've got, like there's somebody at the monastery today, they're saying they've got 4 kids to look after, 4 young kids, and in the course of their day they can't meditate at all because there's just too much going on with the kids, and they're very loud and running around and very time-consuming, energy-draining. But when you're mindful, even if you're with 4 lively kids, maybe you can just hear the sounds of the kids, see the visual images, and just see them as objects come into your senses sometimes. Obviously, if you're a parent, maybe you don't have much occasion to do that, but even if only for a few moments, sound is just sound. Or the sight, the movement of bodies running around doing their thing, it's just sights. Smells, taste, touch, the same. Or similarly, if it's just thoughts and memories coming up into your consciousness, and even if you're stressed and there's a lot of thoughts and they're quite powerful emotions or strong trains of thought, agitated trains of thought, if you can just establish mindfulness and remember, when the mind is peaceful, then those thoughts just become like waves on the ocean. Sounds are just like waves on the ocean. Sights are just like waves on the ocean. They come into your awareness and then they dissolve away again and disappear. So even though it might be difficult to sustain mindfulness in those situations, if you can only do it for a moment or two, it's better than nothing. And it maybe just is enough to change your way of looking at your experience at a time when you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed in a kind of busy, difficult, challenging situation. So one way of referring to this is upasamanusati, recollecting peace, what it feels like to be peaceful, what the perception is of the peaceful mind. Bring it up. Maybe you can remember the feeling of joy or bliss when you're peaceful, when you've been peaceful in the past. You just pause and you remember what that feels like. And it pulls your mind away from the feeling of tension or pain or stress that you may be experiencing. And now you go to that peaceful place by bringing up the memory of it from the past. What it feels like when you're peaceful. The body feels very relaxed, or you don't even feel it at all sometimes when you're peaceful. It completely disappears. The mind becomes brighter when you're peaceful. So even though you may be in a stressful situation, if you have enough, we say enough wherewithal, enough mindfulness, awareness at that moment just to turn your mind to remember what the peaceful mind is like. And you go to that. If you're a visual kind of person, then maybe it's the brightness of the peaceful mind. Turn to that. Some people go to the silence of the mind, the sound of silence. When your mind is peaceful, there's that inner silence. When there's no particular noise grabbing your attention, even though there may be noises happening in the background, you go into the peaceful, silent mind. Whatever works. But we can do this sometimes in a very simple and direct way to cut through or let go of some of the mental agitation. You can do that at the beginning of a meditation session, just to put you in the right frame of mind, or in the middle of a busy day, or at a stressful moment. So sometimes we have to remember or bring up the perception of peace, and you apply that, that's the goal, that's what you're aiming for. It doesn't necessarily mean nothing's happening, and that can be the perception if it helps you, but you can also think of peace in the middle of a busy situation or an agitated state of mind, where you start introducing the unagitated, undisturbed state of mind, or the perception of peace in one way or another, the mind that is still. So we have all these similes of, say, still water, where you've picked up some muddy water, but you put it in a jar and then you let it go still, and then all the silt drops and you can see anything you want in that water. Whatever works for you as a perception of peace, you bring your mind to that to help calm you down, and it can happen quite quickly. You start to drop everything, especially if you've done it before. Other aspects of the goal of our practice, nibbana, the end of suffering, we have the mind that is letting go as opposed to the mind that is taking up. You notice when you're stressed, your mind is taking something up. It's taking up a thought or a mood or some issue, some problem that's come up in your life, and you're taking it out, meaning you're bringing it into your mind and thinking about it a lot, and it seems maybe overwhelming, or you can't relax because you keep thinking of this problem. What am I going to do about it? How can I overcome? How can I sort it out? But maybe you take a moment just to ask yourself, what am I taking up in my mind right now? What am I picking up and holding on to? As opposed to letting go, putting down. So these are very simple techniques, perceptions, thoughts, recollections that help you to incline your mind more towards the peace of the Dhamma and to let go of whatever it is you're holding on to or taking up in that moment. It doesn't mean to say you'll get rid of all your problems or all your thoughts or all your feelings, but it means you're changing your attitude towards them. And the mind is going to this state we call the state where it's witnessing things rather than holding on to them and identifying with them so they become a problem or a cause of stress. This is one of the skills of the meditator, learning how to bring up that awareness where you can know things but let go at the same time. One of the biggest obstacles we have as we practice meditation, especially in the beginning, is we often have a lot of aversion, what we call vipavadanha, aversion, not wanting to be, not wanting to experience certain things. So we get angry because we're having all these thoughts, or we have a painful feeling that's interrupting our meditation, or we've had a problem arise in our day that is now plaguing the mind as we're trying to meditate, and that becomes the source of our aversion. So these other recollections, the opposite of bringing up the recollection of peace or emptiness or letting go, counter that. And quite often it's as simple as just reminding yourself to be at peace with whatever it is, or to let go, or to think of the empty room or the empty monastery or the empty place, to counter the opposite, which is aversion. And when you have aversion, you're picking something up and holding on to it with negativity, with aversion, with ill will. You notice when you have aversion, you're still holding on to something, even though you want to get rid of it. To get rid of something, you have to push it away. If it's a physical object you don't want, you have to push it away to get rid of it. That pushing away is a touching of the object, or holding on to the object. Before you can push something away, you have to hold it. You can't just wish it away, you push it away physically. Or if it's a bug, like a fly or a mosquito, you have to swat it or get it somehow to get it away. If it's a person, you have to find some way to push them, physically push them, or physically instruct them to go away. Go away, get out of here. But it's a form of contact, isn't it? Any aversion to any kind of object that's come into your awareness is a form of contacting that object. So it's actually holding on to it. If you do that repeatedly, this is forming, we say karma, a habit of mind. Every time that object, that thought, or that feeling, if it's a painful feeling, or that memory comes into your awareness, if you react with aversion, then you contact that thought, that object with aversion. And if you do that every time, it becomes automatic. So every time you have a certain thought, you say, oh no, not again, this thought again, or this problem again, or this person again that I'm thinking of or seeing, or this sound that I don't like again. It becomes habit, doesn't it? The mind touches it, says, I don't want this, and then repeatedly touching that object becomes a pathway, a habit of mind. And this is what we call karma. Until you hardly need to have any contact at all. Straight away the aversion arises, and straight away you fall into aversion by just the slightest contact. Whereas when you do the opposite, you start investigating what's going on and using skillful, what we call skillful means, ubaya, to deal with these negative habits you've built up, perhaps. You're doing the opposite. So where you've been touching the object with aversion, now you're just letting it be. That might require some investigation and what we call wise reflection, or paying wise attention to the object. You say, oh, this is what it is. There's not a lot I can do about it, so I'll just let it be. When you touch something, it's like you take ownership of it, doesn't it? You're having a reaction to a thought or a feeling or even some external situation. You're taking ownership of it by touching it. When you let it be, it's like you're letting go of the ownership of that thought, that object. So then you can just allow it to be there, because perhaps you can't get rid of it anyway, but you're allowing it to be there without touching it, or picking it up, or taking ownership of it. And that's something you have to practice repeatedly. I mean, you could say that's also another kind of karma, habitual karma, but in a good way, for your benefit, because now you're allowing yourself to let go rather than holding on to the thing you don't like. You're just letting go. You're aware of it, but you let go. And that's something you practice over and over again in meditation. Noticing unpleasant feelings, but letting go, rather than holding on with aversion or touching them with aversion. You know they're there, but you let go, so you don't give them much importance in your mind. Or memories of people or events, situations. They still come up into your awareness because they've made an impact on you in the past. But when you deal with them now, as you meditate, you just notice them and let them go, or let them be, rather than trying to push them away. So a big part of our meditation is learning to be with the unpleasant. Learning to be at ease with the unpleasant in yourself, whether it's physical unpleasantness, tension and physical pain, discomfort, feelings of tiredness, or mental unpleasantness, unpleasant memories about disappointments and unpleasant things that have happened, or just thoughts of aversion that come up that then you react to with aversion, more aversion. Now you're learning to just be at peace with it. Say, okay, I've got this aversion from the past, you're recognizing its old karma, but then just letting it be. Not building it up, not giving it a lot of importance. We say not touching it. So then it loses its influence over the mind. It doesn't matter so much. You have a thought, maybe a very negative thought of anger or even hatred, but it's just a thought. Maybe you could bring it up as a question, like, can I be at peace with this negative memory or negative thought I have? How can I be at peace with this? Maybe recollecting what it feels like to be peaceful is enough to do it. Or you have to search around to see what will work, what attitude, what way of looking at your experience at that moment when you're experiencing aversion. What will work for you to be at peace with that feeling or that memory? Why? Because the Buddha and all the enlightened masters have done this before us, and they found out how they can do it successfully. It's not like the Buddha or Ajahn Chah or any other wise enlightened teacher didn't have to deal with aversion in their meditation. They've all done it. They've all had painful feelings, illness, tiredness. They've all had busy, agitating, chaotic situations to deal with people, with different situations they've come across in their life. They've all been through that. It's not that they didn't go through it, but they learned not to hold on to their aversion, reactions of aversion, not to pick up and take ownership of those unpleasant experiences, but just to leave them be. Just as if you were holding something that was uncomfortable because it's heavy or hot, burning you, or something that somehow or other is hurting you, just putting it down on the ground and immediately the painful feeling subsides. They've learnt to do that. So that's one way they describe somebody who's reached Nibbana. They've put down the burden. They've stopped carrying the burden in their mind. They've learnt how to just put it down, let it go. So you can use that imagery or that perception. How can I put this burden down? It doesn't necessarily mean all your problems in your life would disappear overnight, but it's more, how you're relating to them, how you're reacting to them. It can be a kind of mantra you can bring up in your meditation. How can I be at peace with this? How can I put this heavy burden down? Living in the world, you can't avoid having burdens, can you? Living as a human being, just having a human body already gives you some burdens. It gives you aches and pains and difficulties that come with having a human body. Going through this life will already bring you some burdens, but then growing up, earning a living, feeding it, clothing it, and if you have any other people you're living with, family, parents, partners, children, friends, it's very easy for life to become burdensome. Because that's the nature of living in the world, isn't it? We're sharing this world with 8 billion other people, and then all the animals and insects, sharing the resources of this world. You're constantly coming across the fact that you don't live alone in this world. Every day you go to work, you have to learn to cooperate and work with other people. How you earn your living, you go shopping, you have to queue up to pay your for the things you've purchased. Traveling on the road, you've got to travel on the road with other drivers. Walking along the sidewalk, you have to walk along the sidewalk with other people. Living in the forest, you might think, oh, monks, it's all right for you, you go off and live in the forest, you don't have to deal with all these problems. But you live in the forest, you're going to live with other things. Creepy crawlies, snakes, wombats, kangaroos, deer. Living in the world, it's burdensome. It's dukkha. And one of the ways the Buddha described dukkha is that which is difficult to endure. It's painful. It's burdensome. Having a body, looking after this body, living in the world is burdensome. So it's bound to affect your mind. But then the mind of Nibbana is the mind that is no longer burdened by living in the world. And that's achievable in this life for a human being, because the Buddha and the enlightened teachers have shown us. They live in an unburdened way. They've learnt not to hold on to their reactions to pleasure and pain, liking and disliking, not to attach, but they've learnt to put down the burden. And we have to remind ourselves of that. Ideally, every day, constantly remind yourself, this burden that I'm picking up now, this heavy burden of work and family and health issues and problems that we have, can all be put down. How do we put them down? Well, we practice this practice of the Noble Eightfold Path, and particularly developing mindfulness and understanding of the way things are. How not to take it all up as a burden and carry it around with us and weigh ourselves down, but how to put things down. Even if you are carrying a burden, say you have a baby, you have to carry that baby half the time. So it's a burden, but you can carry a baby and get stressed about it, or you can carry a baby and do it in a relaxed way where you're letting go of the stress. Or you're carrying heavy shopping or some item that you have to carry that's really physically heavy and is a burden, but you can do it without getting stressed about it. So it's not like Nibbana is necessarily that one has no more burdens, one still has a body, has to eat, has to live in the world. It's just the mind is not taking up those burdens as a cause for personal stress. How can we achieve that? One is by noticing how you react with aversion to things. When there is a burden, how easily do you react to it and become averse to it and worn down mentally by it? Something we're learning in our meditation. How not to do it. They say one who is meditating is learning to put down the burden. And the burden is these 5 khandhas of body, feelings, perceptions, thoughts, sense consciousness. The biggest one is thoughts, isn't it? We identify so strongly with every thought that they become burdensome. We want to hold on to the delightful, pleasant thoughts, and we want to get rid of the unpleasant ones. So even thoughts become a burden. Even thoughts weigh nothing. They're totally weightless, invisible. They still weigh down on us. And you think about those things that you consider to be problems in your life, and already you feel awful. Why is it a thought which is totally weightless, invisible, is nothing other than a string of ideas and words linked together? Why can that suddenly make you feel so stressed, sad, angry, worried? Because you take it up as a personal burden in your mind. You hold on to it, you touch those thoughts, and then you say, these are my thoughts. That's the real problem, isn't it? It's the taking ownership of every thought, believing it, becoming it. And then that becomes a habit, so it's not just once, but you do it over and over again until it's automatic. And you become stressed. Maybe permanently stressed, or it seems permanently. It feels like it's just a fixed experience now. Having thought once, thought twice, thought 3 times, taken those thoughts as me, mine, myself, believe them as self, then we keep thinking them, and then over and over again to the point where it just becomes habitual. And so we feel quite unhappy with them. They come up often. This practice of meditation, following the Buddhist teachings and cultivating the insight, understanding, mindfulness, and this sense of peace is doing the opposite. You're unraveling, unpacking the tangled mass of thinking and then putting down the burden, letting go. That's a skill we need to give time to. If you really want to do it well and really want to put this burden down, well, you've got to give it some time. As I often say, if you say your life is too busy, too chaotic, too many burdens, too many responsibilities to meditate or practice mindfulness or do this practice, then really you're condemning yourself to suffering. You're saying, I prefer just to carry on feeling stressed and suffering. I haven't got time to deal with it. Which is a shame, because we can deal with it. We can deal with it very well. Human beings can put down the burden of their suffering, often much quicker and easier than they think. Because when you think about it, well, that just adds one more problem to the whole situation. So you're stressed, and then you think about your stress, and you get more stressed. Downward spiral. But if you take the opportunity to just pause, even for a moment, and bring up the perception of peace, or unburden your mind a little bit, follow a few mindful breaths, relax a bit, or notice how you're attaching to those negative thoughts, then you realize maybe quite quickly you can let go. You can put down this burden, and you have to just keep working at it, keep practicing it. I would suggest there's nothing more important in life than this, learning to understand your own mind, and letting go of these burdens that we love to carry around, and weigh ourselves down with and suffer with. There's nothing more important, because we spend so much time on the material side of our existence, earning money, attaining wealth, looking for pleasant experiences, thinking that this will bring us happiness. But we neglect this other inner side of our existence. If you just equal things up a bit and give a bit more attention to the mind and to the mind that loves to pick up burdens and carry them around, if you put a bit more attention on that and learn to let go a bit more, straight away your life will improve. We have to teach ourselves how to do it, and we have to keep coming back to it. That's probably the hardest thing, is to keep coming back to the practice. We can do it once, occasionally, when we're in the mood, or we go to the meditation center or on a retreat or something. But then the rest of the time, instead of letting go of our burdens, we let go of the practice. So we go back to filling up our mind with more burdens, until maybe the next crisis, and then we say, oh, now it's time to practice again. But you don't want to wait until the next crisis. Just do it now, every day. Be prepared. When you recollect the peace of the mind, especially if you've experienced some before, one thing that can do is remind you of how pleasant the practice is once you're getting into it. The hardest part of it all is beginning the practice. If you remind yourself how you've experienced some peace before, maybe you've quite enjoyed meditation in the past sometimes, when you've seen through a certain mental problem you had or a burden you were carrying, and seeing it was just a state of mind, just a train of thought that you can put down. When you remind yourselves that you've done that before, then that will help you to get back into it. Do it again. If I've done it before, I can do it again. You've managed to put down the burden before, well, you can do it again. Sometimes we have to remind ourselves, sometimes we have to develop strategies, plan it. How am I going to deal with the next stressful situation? I have to bring up that perception of peace. I have to take those deep breaths, do a bit more mindfulness of breathing. I have to turn to remind myself of the mind of letting go as opposed to the mind of attachment. You have to plan it, prepare yourself for the next time, so that when you're next feeling totally overwhelmed by your experience, stressed, worried, agitated, you have to at that moment say, this is what I must do. I must pause, take some deep breaths, I must pause, bring up the perception of peace. I must bring up the perception of whatever it is that brings this feeling of peace to the mind. The empty room, the clear sky, the brightness of mind. There must be something in there that works for you. You have to find it. That's what we call the ubaya, the skillful means, and then you bring your mind back to it and have that ready for the next time you're feeling stressed. Sometimes it's as simple as changing posture. It's so simple that we overlook it all the time. It's another way that we can change our mood quite quickly. You notice when you're feeling down, you feel depressed or fed up with the world, well, you tend to just stick in whatever posture you're in. So if you're sitting, you just sort of sit there, sinking into your chair. If you're lying there, you just lie there. You can't get up out of bed, maybe. If you're standing, maybe just standing there. Sometimes you notice how you stand stuck in a mood, not changing posture. But when you consciously change posture, and that maybe is all the prompting you need, you just remind yourself, change posture, things immediately open up. It's like a little putting down of the burden. So if you're sort of stuck into depression and you're lying there, can't get out of bed. Well, that's your goal at that time. Nibbana is getting out of bed, changing the mood, changing the posture, changing the room, moving from one room to another, moving away from something that is you associate with stress, suffering, you move out of that place. If you're sitting, or maybe getting up and walking. If you're walking, maybe stopping, sitting down. And sometimes when we're agitated, we're walking around, pacing around, moving around, doing this, doing that. Sometimes then the best thing to do is change posture and actually still yourself, quieten yourself down and sit down. There's no one answer here. What you have to look at is how, become aware of how changing posture, consciously changing posture or mindfully changing posture can help you to let go of a certain train of thought or state of mind that you're holding on to. Even the Buddha said sometimes a good thing to do, like say you're really dull or stuck into some sort of more dull state of mind, go wash your face. A while ago we were walking, took some visiting monks to see a Japanese garden, and they have the fountain for washing your face. It's not necessarily to wash dirt off, it's more to waken yourself up and make yourself mindful again. It's just kind of a stone fountain, and you just go there and you splash some water on your face, and it changes everything. Whatever train of thought you had before will dissolve as you wash your face. The water is usually cool. Even on a cold day, you wash your face, suddenly everything changes, doesn't it? It breaks through the train of thought. Sometimes we have to be bold and do something to get out of the habit, to re-establish mindfulness, get out of the habit. Sit up, stand up, walk, lie down, sit down. Everything can be a useful means, a useful tool, if it's done with some understanding and mindfulness. One of the ways we suffer is because things become a burden, because we feel they're like fixed in the mind. A certain way of looking at your experience becomes a habitual way of looking at your experience. So it's like, oh, it's always like this. Everything always goes wrong. When you're stuck in that perception, then maybe you only notice one side of your experience. You only notice what's going wrong, or where things are not as good as they could be. That's all you notice, and then of course you miss all the good stuff. So you have to sometimes learn how to look at things from a different angle. Question your own thoughts, not believe every thought. Say, is this really true, what I'm thinking? Is it really as bad as I think it is? When you help other people, one thing you gain from that is you realize there's always someone worse off than you in the world. And then that puts your own state of mind in perspective, and maybe it's not so bad. Or even yourself, just remembering in the past you've been through worse. So whatever you're experiencing right now at this moment is not so bad when you realize things are being worse. If you're really you're really the ingrained pessimist, maybe instead of saying things are being worse, you're saying things are being better. Okay, well, if things are being better, maybe you can get back to that state where things are better. That's like remembering when you've been peaceful in your meditation. You say, things have been better, okay, I can get back to that. What you're seeing is a flexibility of mind, that nothing is fixed, because the Buddha pointed out everything is impermanent, subject to change. Whatever arises ceases. So if you're in a particular habitual state of mind that's causing you stress, then you can use that to your advantage. You say, oh, this is impermanent. The quicker you become mindful, the quicker you can let it go. So in the end, nothing is fixed. The nature of the mind is it's luminous, peaceful. What happens is over time we pick up burdens. We pick up thoughts, perceptions, memories, and we cling on to them, identify with them, and so we fill the mind up. So it seems to become darker, heavier, worse off because of it. That's another reflection you can bring out. Oh, deep down, this mind is just luminous, peaceful. There's nothing here. It's not like the mind is innately suffering or full of stress or full of burdens. It's not. So how can I get back to that? How can I strip away some of these burdens that I like to carry around with me? That's why sometimes it's good to go out of the house. So you go into nature, you do that. If you're in a house and you're full of gloom and doom and negative mind states, well, go out somewhere, go for a walk, go for a drive in the countryside, go to a park, go to a forest. That in itself already releases some of the burdens and gives you a new perspective on your own mental experience. Simply walking out of where you are, physically walking out, can help. Or if you bring up the perception, this is not me, this is not myself, this is not mine. See if you can apply that to your own thought. This is not really me. Because it's not fixed, it's not part of who I am. It's just a visitor to the mind. It's just a thought, a mental state that's come into the mind that I'm giving too much importance to at the moment. But really, it's not me. It's not mine. It's not myself. Sometimes bringing up that reflection is enough to help you let it go. When you look at other people, that can help as well. You look at other people, maybe you know somebody else who's suffering. You realize, well, they're going through suffering. Maybe at this moment you're not suffering, but you see someone else suffering. You realize, at the moment they're picking up their burdens and attaching. Perhaps that brings up some compassion for that person. You can wish them to be free from their burdens, their suffering. And then you look back at yourself, maybe currently you're not suffering. Or maybe you're suffering too. You say, oh, they're the same as me. They're suffering and I'm suffering. Or maybe you look at someone else and they don't seem to be suffering, but you are. What it's helping you to do is to see the impermanent nature of these states of mind. They arise, they cease. Sometimes you're experiencing, sometimes somebody you know is experiencing. And the only way to free our mind from stress and suffering is to understand it. When you really understand it, then you're ready to throw it out, throw it away. Like the Four Noble Truths is what makes a Buddha or an enlightened person enlightened, by realizing the Four Noble Truths. So that's the suffering, you know it's what it's caused and you abandon the cause. You realize the cessation of suffering, you know the path of practice leading to the cessation of suffering. So an enlightened person, they know suffering. So they don't suffer with suffering because they know it as suffering. oh, it's just like that. That's the nature of it. If it's physical suffering, then oh yeah, the body has some pain, tiredness, painful feelings. They know it as suffering. The reason we suffer is because we don't yet know it as suffering. We just know it as me, I am suffering, and the sense of grasping or attaching to it means we don't really yet know it. Because if we knew it that suffering is not really a self, it's just an experience, then we'd be able to let go. You notice when you're suffering, there's always a sense of self. When there's a sense of self, that means there's delusion there. You're not fully knowing suffering. And we say it, and we say, oh, I'm suffering. But it isn't really yet a noble truth that you've seen. As long as it's that feeling of I am suffering, then there'll be some of this vipawadanha, some of the aversion, because nobody likes suffering, nobody wants physical or mental pain. If you can establish some awareness and investigate it, look at it, then you understand more clearly, oh, this is suffering, it's like this. And then let go of the sense of self, the grasping. So even the Buddha had suffering in the sense he still had aches and pains and illnesses, pains of aging. He heard unpleasant sounds when people didn't like him. They would come and abuse him, argue with him. So it's not like the Buddha didn't have any suffering to experience. It's just he didn't take ownership of it. He didn't let his mind touch it in the sense of react to it with aversion, cling to it and take it up as a burden. Sound was just sound, painful feelings, just painful feelings. There's letting go. I'm sure in those days there would still be screeching sounds from animals or birds. The Buddha would still have to experience them. Didn't have all the sounds that come with modern life, technology and all the things, loud music, and power tools and aeroplanes and cars. But still there would be things that produced unpleasant sounds, I'm sure. But the Buddha didn't take them up as a burden. He just knew sound as sound. Let it go. So the suffering that the Buddha experienced, he didn't take up as a self, as a person. He just knew it. Oh, this is the nature of existence. If you've got ears, there'll be some unpleasant sounds that come your way sometimes. There'll be pleasant sounds as well, and don't attach to them, because that also leads to a subtle kind of suffering. The longing for, the wishing for. And the unpleasant sounds, you just have to put up with, be at peace with them. The pleasant, the unpleasant are equally a burden if you don't treat them with mindfulness and wisdom. But the Buddha did. He had mindfulness, he had wisdom, so he didn't take them up as a burden. So these are some of the things we're learning and looking for in meditation, how not to take up the burden of painful experiences and make them a self, but to know them, let them go. And maybe I'll leave you with these reflections tonight.
Handamayang Dhammakataya Sadhu Karang Dadamase Sadhu 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 Anumodami